He never said much. Didn't need to. But the day of 4-star general walked past the podium, crossed the field, and saluted the man sitting alone in the back row. The whole town forgot how to breathe. That's how you know you've just seen something sacred. And it all started in the quietest corner of the Pine Grove Diner, at exactly 6:42 a.m., where an old man named Raymond Holt folded his coat beside the salt shaker, opened his paper like scripture, and waited for nothing but black coffee and silence. No one really knew where he came from. But everyone knew not to take his booth. Today, we're not telling a story about war. We're telling a story about what comes after, about dignity that doesn't shout, and about a jacket that turned out to carry more history than the town museum. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those. Quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now, let's take a closer look at what really happened. There are towns where people come and go. And then there are towns like Miller's Hollow, where nothing really goes, it just settles. Into the sidewalks, into the shutters, into the smell of bacon grease that floats from the same griddle each morning. The fixture at Miller's Hollow wasn't a bronze statue or a war memorial. It was a man. And a booth. At the Pine Grove Diner, just where Maple meets 3rd, Raymond Holt, mid-70s, posture a little hunched, a patch barely clinging to his jacket sleeve, slipped through the same squeaky door every Monday morning at 6:42 sharp. He didn't need to look for a seat. The corner booth by the window was his, not by claim. By rhythm, morning sugar, came the greeting like clockwork from Evelyn, the longtime waitress whose coffee pot was an extension of her arm. Ray would just nod, half smile, and fold his coat neatly beside him. Always with the patch tucked inside, barely visible. He'd lay out his newspaper, Mill Hollow Gazette, as if it were a prayer mat, and order the same thing every time: buttermilk pancakes, no butter, 2 strips of bacon, no substitutions, no conversation unless spoken to. No one ever asked where Ray came from. They just knew he'd always been there, quiet, predictable, polite. Some said he lived above the old garage. Others said he kept a camper on the edge of the state road. But everyone knew not to sit in that booth. That would have been like sitting in church when you didn't believe. On Mondays, the jukebox eventually looped back to Sinatra, and Evelyn would top off Ray's mug without asking. There were always exactly 3 sips left when she did, like he timed it that way on purpose. Brandon Haynes, a city event coordinator with a clipboard always too full and shoes too clean, burst in one Monday with the kind of energy that didn't belong before sunrise. "Big week ahead, folks! Veterans Day logistics. Total chaos!" he called out to nobody in particular. Evelyn didn't even look up from refilling Mr. Caffrey's decaf. "How behind are you on manners, sweetheart?" she murmured. Brandon huffed. His eyes scanned the diner and landed on Ray. "Still got the throne. I see," he said it loud enough to travel. "Must be nice to have your name carved in a cushion." Ray didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't blink. Evelyn walked over, placed Ray's plate gently, then turned to Brandon without turning. "That man once saved my boy's life," she said, adjusting the silverware. "Pulled him off Miller Street when a car went wild. Broke his own wrist catching him. Paid his tab and walked out. Never said a word about it." Brandon blinked. Mid-sip. "Huh." That laugh he had queued up never landed. Evelyn shrugged. "Lot of things you don't know, baby." Later that week, at Mosswood Grove Memorial Park, the same figure appeared again. Ray, this time with a canvas tote slung over his shoulder and a small, unopened American flag tucked inside. He moved slowly, with purpose. Like each footstep was keeping time with a memory. He stopped at bench 7, dropped to one knee, and began his quiet ritual. A folded cloth wiped off the slats. The name plaque beneath was gently polished Lieutenant Thomas Callahan. Someone had left a flower. It had tipped sideways in the weekend wind. Ray fixed it, adjusted the flag, sat back, said nothing. From behind the hedge a voice barked. "Sir, this area is restricted until city setup is complete." It was Brandon, again, clipboard in hand, puffing himself taller. Ray stood slowly, steadily, nodded once and pointed to the plaque. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just reached into his tote and placed a small wooden sign into the ground. On it were 5 words handwritten in shaky, bold strokes. RMMBRTM. Rye GHT. Brandon squinted. Did you make that? From between the hedges, another voice answered. He makes one every year. It was Tina Alvarez, a groundskeeper for the city and daughter of a Korean War vet. She emerged, work gloves in her back pocket. And I leave it right where he puts it, every time. Brandon, flustered, mumbled about permits and liability and non-standard signage. Tina cut him off. He's been here longer than your clipboard. Ray had already moved on. Another bench, another plaque, another name spoken in silence. Across the path, Mr. Auden, wrapped in 2 scarves and sipping lukewarm coffee, gave Ray a slow, trembling salute. Ray nodded, didn't salute back. Not yet. The wind shifted. The leaves whispered. The city didn't know it, but Veterans Day had already begun. Thursday, November 9th, Miller's Hollow did its best for Veterans Day. Banners hung a little crooked. Folding chairs weren't quite straight, but people showed up. Teachers in windbreakers, high schoolers in stiff ROTC uniforms, and aging vets in jackets that hadn't fit right since the 90s. The small city park had been transformed into a tribute zone. Paper flags lined the gravel paths. A choir of middle schoolers stood near the gazebo, fidgeting in matching navy cardigans. The scent of damp leaves, brass polish, and pine sap mixed in the cold morning air. Brandon Haynes stood at the podium, nerves visible in his jittering hands. He adjusted the mic, then adjusted it again. The wind tangled his note cards. He dropped one. He mispronounced the keynote speaker's name. Twice. Please welcome our guest of honor, General Eliza Torrance. A smattering of polite applause. A cough, a child yawning. Then she appeared. From behind the stage curtain, flanked by 2 cadets. Silver hair pulled into a neat braid. Her coat weighed with insignia and memories. Eyes sharp scanning, she walked with the confidence of someone who once led people into enemy fire and got them out again. Torrance reached the steps, nodded once to Brandon, then paused. Mid-step, her gaze locked across the crowd. Far back near the oak tree, there he was. Ray Holt. In his plain coat, patch just visible now, hands resting on a cane no one had seen him use before. His head was slightly bowed. Not in defiance. Not in fatigue, but something quieter, something older. Torrance didn't speak. She didn't salute the crowd. She stepped off the riser and walked. Not toward the podium, not toward the camera crews or reporters, toward the bench, toward the man no one expected to matter this much. Each footstep made the silence heavier. The choir trailed off. The flags fluttered once, then stilled. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She stopped 2 feet from Ray, straightened her back, brought her right hand to her brow. A full military salute, precise, controlled, absolute. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman clutched her husband's sleeve. A boy dropped his program. Someone whispered, "That's Mr. Ray from the diner." Brandon stood frozen, one hand still awkwardly on the mic, mouth open. Torrance didn't lower her arm. Not yet. She held it longer than protocol demanded. Then finally, she lowered it. Her voice, when it came, was clear and measured. That patch was given to only 5 men. He's the last one standing, not a word more. No drumroll, no medals, just that. Ray didn't stand immediately. He sat still, letting the words dissolve into the November air. Then slowly, with a grace no one had seen him use before, he rose, straightened his coat, lifted his chin, and returned the salute. Somewhere in the distance, a single trumpet began to play, taps. The sound pierced through the cold. Low, mournful, absolute. And just like that, everything changed. The town didn't see an old man anymore. They saw what he'd carried. All these years. In silence. Without needing to be noticed. The next morning, for the first time in years, Ray Holt's booth sat empty. But his coat wasn't missing. It was folded. Laid neatly where his plate usually rested. Patch facing outward. Beside it a receipt. Blank except for 2 things on a printed timestamp, 6042 AMs. And in blue ink, his name. Ray Holt, under the edge of the coat, tucked beside a napkin holder, was a handwritten note. 5 words. Some honors don't need ceremony. Brandon walked into the diner an hour later. This time, quietly. No clipboard, no announcements. He sat across from the jacket. Didn't touch it, Didn't speak. Evelyn brought 2 mugs of coffee, one half full. Did he say anything when he left it? Brandon asked, eyes on the coat. She shook her head. Just asked for your usual table. That was it. Brandon leaned back. How long have you known? Evelyn slid into the opposite booth. I don't know what I knew. Just enough. Enough to trust the quiet. Brandon looked at the napkin again. He saved your boy, and you never told anyone. Wasn't mine to tell. The front door chimed. Tina Alvarez stepped in, work jacket dusted with rain. She took the spot next to Evelyn. Figured I'd find you two here. Might as well add my piece, Brandon nodded. Gestured to the jacket. Be my guest. Tina leaned in. 2 winters ago, week before Christmas, power went down at Mosswood. Couldn't get crews out until Monday. She paused. But Saturday morning, every headstone was cleared, every path shoveled, the entrance lights reinstalled, on someone's dime. I found the receipt days later. Signed H. Holt. Night crew. The pieces fell into place. The rituals. The silence. The unclaimed acts of service. He'd been there the whole time. Not hiding. Just not needing to be found. That night, Brandon didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with the darn napkin spread in front of him like it was some kind of sacred scripture. Some honors don't need ceremony. The words buzzed in his mind. He'd planned Veterans Day for 3 years running. Brass bands. Folding chairs. Speeches. But somehow, in all that, he'd missed the most important veteran in town. And the worst part, Ray never asked to be seen. Brandon stared at his calendar, then circled Sunday. 3:00 p.m., that was what the man next door had said. Sunday came with a cold drizzle, barely enough to warrant an umbrella, but just enough to sting the cheeks. Brandon arrived at Hillcrest Cemetery, the veteran section, unsure of what he expected. He walked the rows until he found Ray. Already there, no jacket, hands behind his back, eyes locked on a stone. Lieutenant Thomas Callahan. Same name from the bench in the park. Ray didn't acknowledge Brandon at first. Didn't flinch when the younger man stepped up beside him. Brandon said nothing. Instead, he pulled a white flower from his coat and held it low at his side, just like Ray. They stood in silence. A stillness deeper than grief. A stillness of memory, respect, and the weight of things left unsaid. Finally, Ray broke it. He was 23. Had a laugh that cracked through radio static. His voice was low, worn. Called me Cap, even though I was younger. Carried a photo in his helmet. I never asked who she was. Always meant to. He crouched slowly. Placed his flower at the base of the stone. Brandon followed. 2 white blooms, now leaning together like old friends. I come every year, Ray said. Because I can. He turned to Brandon. Why are you here? Brandon didn't flinch. Because I should have listened sooner. Ray gave no reply, but he didn't walk away. That week, Brandon returned to the library. Maggie, the archivist, greeted him like she'd been waiting. Took you long enough, she said, without looking up from her crossword. Brandon chuckled. I'm looking for anything on Ray Holt, military records, local news. Anything. She stood slowly. Come on, he won't be in Google. But the truth's curled up in drawer 6B. In the dusty archive room, Brandon rolled through microfiche reels, blue light flickering across his eyes, and then, between 2 folds of faded headlines, 5 rescued from nightfall drop hero remains unnamed. The article told of a nighttime operation, Southeast Asia, blackout conditions. An unnamed airman carried 2 wounded soldiers 3 miles through hostile terrain after the pilot was killed. The description ended with one line. Witnesses say the man wore a triangular patch, not in any documented inventory. That was him. A ghost in a record. A quiet echo in a loud world. Brandon found Ray's address listed only under a P.O. box, but Maggie, of course, knew better. The house was a rental off Chestnut Lane, behind a sagging gate and a porch with no railing. He knocked. No answer. An older man from the house next door spotted him. Looking for Ray. Yes, sir. I'm Brandon, City Events Office. The man nodded. Name's Carl. Known Ray since '64. You won't find him home today. Do you know where he is? Carl leaned on his cane. Sunday, 3 p.m. Hillcrest Cemetery. Rain or shine. That's where he'll be. He paused, then added, He's not hiding, son. He just doesn't need to be found. That line stayed with Brandon for days. He thought about the times he'd tried to plan recognition, schedule it, frame it, script it. And here was a man who'd spent his life serving in silence. Brandon opened his calendar again, circled the following Sunday, wrote 3 words beneath the date, "Don't let him walk alone." That Sunday, the path to Hillcrest was less lonely. Brandon walked beside Ray, didn't speak much, didn't need to. They left flowers, they said the names, and they stood, together. Days later, Ray did something no one expected. He agreed to speak at Career Day at Miller's Hollow High. The auditorium buzzed with restless teenagers. Parents lined the aisles. Teachers whispered from the back. Ray stood backstage in a plain sweater. No uniform, no insignia. Brandon stood beside him, holding a folded letter. "You sure about this?" Ray nodded. "One condition." Brandon smiled. "No applause." Ray stepped to the mic. He looked out over a sea of unwrinkled faces and blinking smartphones. "I was asked to talk about service," he began. "But not all service wears a uniform. Sometimes, it's doing the quiet job when no one's watching." He told the story of carrying a wounded man through 3 miles of jungle. Told it with no flair, no drama, just truth. He kept saying, "Don't stop, keep walking." So I did. And I never forgot. He looked out at the students. "You'll be told to speak up. Sometimes, you should. Other times, you'll need to shut up and carry." No one clapped. No one needed to. The room understood. A student raised his hand. What did the patch mean? Ray's eyes locked with his. "It meant I went where others wouldn't." Silence fell like a curtain. Brandon later returned to the library. Maggie met him at the door. In her hand, a brass key. North display case. Left shelf. Inside, under a single spotlight, Ray's coat, the patch facing outward. Below it, a brass plaque. He reminded us. Norman Jr., now 7, tugged at Brandon's sleeve. "Can I wear a jacket like his someday?" Brandon looked down, then smiled softly. "One day, kid. If you earn it the right way." Raymond Holt never came back for the coat. It remained inside the Pine Grove Diner, folded neatly in the corner booth like a flag at half-mast. No plaque, no glass case. Just the smell of syrup in the air, and a seat left respectfully empty. Brandon would stop by now and then. Not every morning, but enough. Sometimes he'd sit across from the jacket, sip his coffee slowly, and read the local paper, like Ray used to. Evelyn never said much. She'd refill his cup, set down a plate without asking, and give him a quiet smile. "You learning to read the room now?" she asked, once. Brandon nodded, trying. A word spread, but not like gossip. It passed through town like a whisper of something sacred. The kind of story told in hushed tones over lunch counters and church steps. Children started asking about the man in the coat. Some called him a hero, but those who knew better simply said, "He reminded us." A few months later, a small group petitioned to rename Bench 7 in Mosswood Park. The city council approved it unanimously. The new plaque read, "The Quiet Sentinel," in honor of Raymond Holt, who remembered those we forgot. They didn't hold a ribbon cutting. Didn't invite news crews. Just a few folding chairs. And a trumpet, that was enough. Brandon continued his quiet search into Ray's past. Not to invade it, but to understand what kind of man chooses humility over memory and silence over ceremony. He found more stories. Scraps of service records, faded photographs, letters never mailed, reports never finished. It painted a picture of someone who'd given everything and expected nothing. One detail stood out above all. Every address Ray had listed over the last 30 years was either above a garage behind a chapel or near a cemetery, as if he wanted to live close to the places where things were fixed, prayed over, or remembered. Years passed. New planners came through City Hall. New names, new faces. But the corner booth at Pine Grove stayed untouched. Some tried sitting there. Once, Evelyn would gently shake her head. "You'll want that one," she'd say, pointing to another table. No one argued. Not twice. Every Veterans Day now, Miller's Hollow holds a small additional moment. After the brass band plays, after the speeches wrap, a single chair is left empty at the front. Beside it, a folded diner napkin. And a sign that reads, "Some honors don't need ceremony." No one reads a speech. No one explains it. And yet everyone seems to understand. Reflection. The lesson: Ray Holt never chased attention. He never needed to be honored, because he had already honored everyone else. His life wasn't about medals. It was about presence. Being there, showing up, without needing to say, I was here. We live in a world that shouts, that celebrates the loudest voice. But sometimes, the truest form of strength is quiet. Quiet like wiping off a forgotten nameplate at 6 a.m. Quiet like fixing a lantern no one saw you fix. Quiet like sitting at the same booth every Monday just to remember a friend who never made it back. Ray Holt didn't want applause, but he deserved something deeper, a memory that echoes. Maybe we all know someone like Ray, a parent, a neighbor, a coach, a teacher. Someone who never asked for credit, but made everything around them better. This story is for them. Final words to the audience. Thank you for sitting with this story. If it stirred something in you, hold on to that. Maybe take a moment today to call someone who served. Or thank someone who doesn't wear a uniform, but still shows up every day for others. And if you've ever felt like what you do doesn't matter because it's quiet, remember, Ray Holt. The world changes one quiet act at a time. Narrator, soft outro. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, about quiet heroes, unspoken sacrifices, and the beauty of presence, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of each other. And never forget to remember those who quietly remembered us.